The nation had already been buzzing for weeks about the highly anticipated panel discussion on the future of the Supreme Court and democracy, scheduled to air live on one of the most watched primetime political talk shows. The producers had promised fireworks by pairing Chief Justice John Roberts, the often reserved yet undeniably influential leader of the U.S. Supreme Court, with Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, the outspoken Democrat from Texas known for her razor-sharp wit and fearless comebacks. For millions of Americans, the clash represented something far bigger than just a TV debate. It symbolized the growing tension between a conservative judiciary and a younger generation of progressive lawmakers who refused to hold their tongues. By the time the cameras switched on, the studio was charged with electricity. Rows of audience members, journalists, and political junkies leaned forward in anticipation. The moderator, a polished TV veteran with decades in broadcasting, smiled into the lens. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight, history is being made. We are honored to host Chief Justice John Roberts and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, who have agreed to a frank discussion on the judiciary's role in modern America." Applause thundered across the studio. Roberts, dressed in a dark navy suit, sat stiffly in his chair, his expression measured but betraying irritation at the fact he was even here. The Chief Justice rarely appeared in public interviews, let alone a primetime debate. Many close to him had warned that sharing a stage with Crockett could backfire. But Roberts had his reasons. The court's credibility had been under fire. Ethics scandals, controversial rulings on voting rights, and decisions reshaping the balance of power in America had put the justices in the spotlight. Roberts believed this was his chance to defend the institution. Crockett, on the other hand, looked at ease. She wore a sharp crimson blazer that popped against the set's blue background. Her hair was styled immaculately, her confidence radiating before she even spoke. Viewers across the country knew that Crockett was not one to mince words. Her voice carried both authority and a touch of Texas grit. The debate began civilly enough. Roberts carefully laid out his arguments for judicial restraint, stressing that the court was merely interpreting the Constitution. Crockett listened, her expression unreadable. When it was her turn, she leaned forward and delivered a blistering critique of the court's recent decisions. "Chief Justice," she said evenly, "you say the court only interprets the Constitution, but let's be real. This court has gone beyond interpretation. You've rewritten the lives of millions of Americans with rulings that strip away fundamental rights. That's not neutrality. That's activism, judicial activism in a robe." Gasps rippled through the audience. Roberts' jaw tightened. He raised his voice slightly. "Congresswoman Crockett, with all due respect, your accusation is unfounded. The court is bound by precedent in the text of the Constitution. It is not for us to legislate from the bench." Crockett's smile was sharp. "Precedent. You overturned Roe v. Wade after 50 years. You gutted the Voting Rights Act. You've handed corporations unchecked power. If that's your idea of respecting precedent, I'd hate to see what happens when you decide to ignore it." The crowd erupted in applause. Roberts shifted in his seat, his face reddening. The moderator attempted to calm the energy, but the exchange had already begun to escalate. The tension between the two wasn't just ideological, it was personal. Roberts leaned forward, his voice rising in a way that startled both the moderator and the audience. "You have no understanding of constitutional law, Congresswoman. You're grandstanding for the cameras, misleading the American people. Do you think shouting soundbites makes you right? Do you think you're above the Supreme Court?" The studio went silent for a beat. The Chief Justice of the United States had just raised his voice, practically screamed, at a sitting member of Congress on live television. Even the moderator froze. But Crockett didn't flinch. Instead, she turned her head slowly toward Roberts, her expression icy calm. Her silence stretched long enough to make the audience hold its breath. Then, in a voice so cold and sharp it cut through the tension like a knife, she delivered her response. "Chief Justice Roberts, the Supreme Court is not above the American people. And I don't answer to you. I answer to them." The words landed like thunder. A wave of applause and cheers erupted from the audience, breaking the heavy silence. Social media feeds across the country lit up instantly, hashtags trending before the show had even cut to commercial break. Roberts looked stunned. His outburst had backfired, and Crockett's cold, measured response was already going viral. The moderator quickly ushered the program into a short break, but the cameras had already captured the moment, the scream, the silence, and the devastating comeback. What no one knew yet was that the fallout from this televised clash would ripple far beyond one evening's debate. The confrontation had cracked open a national conversation that neither Roberts nor Crockett could control. The show returned from commercial break, but the atmosphere had shifted completely. The moderator's polished smile looked strained, his attempts to restore civility overshadowed by the unforgettable exchange that had just unfolded. Roberts, still visibly shaken, tried to return to his carefully scripted talking points. Yet his earlier outburst lingered in the air. Every word he spoke now sounded defensive. The Chief Justice of the United States was not accustomed to being rattled in public, but millions of Americans had just witnessed it in real time. Crockett, meanwhile, had mastered the art of timing. She let Roberts ramble, interjecting only occasionally with a pointed question or a smirk that seemed to say, "You already lost this round." By the time the program wrapped, it was clear who had dominated. Viewers weren't talking about judicial philosophy or constitutional interpretation. They were talking about that moment. The internet explodes. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation flooded TikTok, X, formerly Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Memes sprouted like wildfire. One showed Roberts with the caption, "Do you think you're above the Supreme Court?" Followed by Crockett's icy reply, "I don't answer to you." Another looped his reddened face and her unbothered smile with the caption, "Roberts got Crocketted." Hashtag Roberts meltdown and hashtag Jasmine wins trended at the top of social media worldwide. Political commentators across the spectrum weighed in. On progressive outlets, Crockett was hailed as a hero. She stood her ground and reminded America who holds the real power, the people, one anchor declared. On conservative platforms, Roberts' defenders tried to spin the narrative. The Chief Justice showed passion, a right-wing columnist argued. It proves he cares about the Constitution. But even they struggled to deny that Crockett had delivered the more memorable line. Late-night comedians had a field day. One quipped, "Usually judges bang a gavel. Last night, Roberts just banged his head against Crockett's wall of calm." The audience roared. Inside the Supreme Court, the fallout wasn't just public. Behind the marble walls of the Supreme Court, Roberts' colleagues were stunned. The Chief Justice had always been seen as the voice of moderation, the careful steward of the court's reputation. Now, that image was shattered. Some justices quietly sympathized. Others rolled their eyes. One clerk leaked to a reporter that Roberts spent the following morning pacing his chambers, muttering that he should never have agreed to appear on live TV. The credibility of the court, already fragile, had taken another blow. Jasmine Crockett's moment. For Jasmine Crockett, the clash became a career-defining moment. Overnight, she went from being a rising progressive star to a household name. Donations poured into her campaign fund. Her social media following tripled in days. At a town hall in Dallas the following week, the crowd gave her a standing ovation before she even spoke. When she recounted the debate, she didn't gloat, she simply repeated her viral line, "I don't answer to him. I answer to the people." The crowd erupted, chanting her name. Her team realized they had struck political gold. They leaned into the narrative, releasing ads that highlighted her calm under pressure and framing her as the voice who stood up to one of the most powerful men in America. Roberts on the defensive. Roberts, meanwhile, faced a nightmare scenario. His defenders tried to blame a setup or an ambush, but the clip didn't lie. He had raised his voice, he had lost his composure, and he had been bested. Editorial boards criticized him for stepping into the political arena. The Chief Justice should never have agreed to appear in such a spectacle, wrote one paper. Another blasted, "If Roberts cannot remain calm in the face of criticism, how can he claim to uphold the dignity of the court?" The episode sparked congressional calls for new ethics rules governing the justices, with Crockett herself leading the charge. Suddenly, Roberts' effort to defend the court had only fueled the movement to reform it. The ripple effect. Weeks later, the clash was still dominating headlines. Students on college campuses studied the exchange in political science classes. Podcasters dissected every word, frame by frame. Even international outlets ran stories about the Chief Justice's rare public slip. Crockett's profile soared so high that whispers of her as a future Senate candidate, or even a presidential contender one day, began circulating. For Roberts, the moment marked a turning point. He became more reclusive, avoiding interviews, declining invitations. Every time he appeared in public, reporters shouted questions about Crockett. His silence only fueled speculation that the once untouchable Chief Justice had been humbled. The legacy of a viral moment. In the end, what happened that night was more than a clash of personalities. It symbolized a generational shift in American politics. A powerful institution, represented by a seasoned Chief Justice, had been publicly challenged by a younger, fearless Congresswoman, and the country had sided with her. For Roberts, the scream would haunt him for years, replayed endlessly in highlight reels of political gaffes. For Crockett, the cold response would define her brand: sharp, unflappable, unapologetically bold. And for the American people, the moment became a reminder of something deeper: that power, no matter how robed or revered, is never beyond accountability. The debate ended, but the conversation it sparked had only just begun.